So weed walleyes, it's one of those things where there's a multitude of different of tactics and approaches you can take to catching walleyes in or around the weeds. One is look for points, indents, pockets. Even if you're fishing a weed flat and there's a depression in there, a lot of times those walleyes will use that depression. So just kind of look for the oddities in weeds, and a lot of times you'll just find walleyes that are just in weeds random, and that's where a simple 1/8 quarter-ounce sinker pinched on a spinner rig going 0.8 to 1.1, that'll catch those. That'll bring those fish out of the weeds. Another one is snap jigging, just ripping the weeds off your jig. Another one, 1/8 ounce jig, shiner early in the season when the weeds are just emerging, and just floating it through there. So there's a ton of different things you can do in weeds, and they're all different. Like, you can't really put weed fishing walleyes in one box, because you go to Leech and there's a lot of cabbage. Mille Lacs, North End, there's a lot of cabbage, and there you're fishing kind of right on the first wall of cabbage or on the inside of the weed line. And that's what a lot of people don't talk about, is fishing walleyes on the inside of the weed line, where they are in 4 to 5 feet right on the inside, and you're literally in the weeds, chopping up weeds with your trolling motor, pitching into them. So you kind of have to identify, what weeds you're fishing, what are you doing, and the best approach to doing it. Similar to basin fishing or shallow reef fishing, what's the approach going to be? Spinners, jigging wraps, whatever it's going to be, and look at the type of structure. And coontail, for instance, matted coontail, I'm going to be looking for points, weeds, pockets, things like that. Cabbage, where it's sparse cabbage stalks, I might be pitching jigs right in there and just slowly working a jig right through there to course those walleyes out of there. And then you go into, heavily milfoiled lakes where you get depressions, and I may go down a flat and just look and fish for depressions and really work those depressions or holes in the weeds as best as I can. And that's where a lot of guys will talk about drop shotting walleye. That's about the only time I'm going to drop shot walleye, is in those weed holes. And I'm talking holes, they might be 5 feet wide, they might be 20 feet wide, they might be 20 yards wide. But that's where you're able to keep that bait in the strike zone or in the fishy zone more with that bait. And everyone knows, as long as the longer your bait is in the fish zone, the more you're going to catch. So in an instance like that, when you're pitching, casting, and your bait's out of the water versus keeping it in the water, 50, 60, 70% more of the time is going to catch you more fish. So weeds, you really have to look at, what am I dealing for weeds? Is it reeds in the early season? Reeds are, they're pretty easy to fish. You can see where they are, they stick out of the water, they're sparse or thick, and they usually create neat little areas to fish around. You can fish around a reed island pretty fast. When you get into matted stuff, really, really thick vegetation is where you really have to bring out different techniques, small jigs, different types of spinners. And so weed fishing, like I said, you just can't put it in a box. I would encourage anyone that wants to learn weed fishing, take some of these tips, but use your own. Like, hey, this is on my lake, it's just matted, slimy weeds. Well, you're probably not going to find walleyes in there unless the weed line breaks in 12 all the way down to 18 feet of water, because the cool water is down there. So you kind of, when you're targeting walleyes in the weeds, the most common is probably cabbage line, cabbage points, cabbage pockets, that type of thing in northern Minnesota. But other than that, you really have to fish it to find those walleyes. Side imaging is great when the fish are on the outside of it, but when fish get inside the weed line, you really can't find them with any electronics. So you need to actually fish those spots to tell if there's fish there.